Bree was the chief village of the Bree land, a small inhabited region, like an island in the empty lands round about. Besides Bree itself, there was Staddle on the other side of the hill, Coombe in a deep valley a little further eastward, and Archet on the edge of the Chetwood. The village of Bree had some 100 stone houses of the big folk, mostly above the road, nestling on the hillside with windows looking west. The hobbits rode up a gentle slope, passing a few detached houses, and drew up outside the inn. The houses looked large and strange to them. The company was in the big common room of the inn. The gathering was large and mixed, as Frodo discovered when his eyes got used to the light. This came chiefly from a blazing log fire, for the 3 lamps hanging from the beams were dim and half veiled in smoke. Barlam and Butterbur were standing near the fire, talking to a couple of dwarves and 1 or 2 strange-looking men. On the benches were various folk, men of Bree, a collection of local hobbits sitting chattering together, a few more dwarves, and other vague figures difficult to make out away in the shadows and corners. As soon as the Shire hobbits entered, there was a chorus of welcome from the Breelanders. Suddenly Frodo noticed that a strange-looking, weather-beaten man, sitting in the shadows near the wall, was also listening intently to the hobbit talk. He had a tall tankard in front of him and was smoking a long-stemmed pipe, curiously carved. His legs were stretched out before him, showing high boots of supple leather that fitted him well, but had seen much wear and were now caked with mud. A travel-stained cloak of heavy dark green cloth was drawn close about him, and in spite of the heat of the room, he wore a hood that overshadowed his face, but the gleam of his eyes could be seen as he watched the hobbits. Frodo, Pippin and Sam made their way back to the parlour. There was no light. Merry was not there and the fire had burnt low. It was not until they had puffed up the embers into a blaze and thrown on a couple of faggots that they discovered Strider had come with them. Dear Frodo, you may meet a friend of mine on the road, a man, lean, dark, tall, by some called Strider. He knows our business and will help you. Make for Rivendell. There I hope we may meet again. If I do not come, Elrond will advise you. Yours in haste, Gandalf. P.S. Make sure that it's the real Strider. There are many strange men on the roads. His true name is Aragorn. All that is gold does not glitter, not all those who wander are lost. The old that is strong does not wither, deep roots are not reached by the frost. From the ashes a fire shall be woken, a light from the shadows shall spring. Renewed shall be blade that was broken, the crownless again shall be king.
The rangers which once guarded the borders of the Shire have been scattered or slain. Frodo has left the Shire, but great perils await him in Bree. I am too late. Someone must find him before the Nazgûl.
As soon as Strider had roused them all, he led the way to their bedrooms. When they saw them, they were glad that they had taken his advice. The windows had been forced open and were swinging, and the curtains were flapping. The beds were tossed about, and the bolsters slashed and flung upon the floor. The brown mat was torn to pieces. At last they left the village behind. The escort of children and stragglers that had followed them got tired and turned back at the south gate. Passing through, they kept on along the road for some miles. It bent to the left, curving back into its eastward line as it rounded the feet of Bree Hill, and then it began to run swiftly downwards into wooded country. To their left they could see some of the houses and hobbit holes of Staddle on the gentler southeastern slopes of the hill. Down in a deep hollow away north of the road there were wisps of rising smoke that showed where Coombe lay. Archet was hidden in the trees beyond. After the road had run down some way and had left Bree Hill standing tall and brown behind, they came on a narrow track that led off towards the north. "This is where we leave the open and take to cover," said Strider. His plan, as far as they could understand it, without knowing the country, was to go towards Archet at first, but to bear right and pass it on the east, and then to steer as straight as he could over the wild lands to Weathertop Hill. In that way they would, if all went well, cut off a great loop of the road, which further on bent southwards to avoid the Midgewater marshes. But of course they would have to pass through the marshes themselves, and Strider's description of them was not encouraging. The ground now became damp and in places boggy, and here and there they came upon pools and wide stretches of reeds and rushes, filled with the warbling of little hidden birds. They had to pick their way carefully to keep both dry-footed and on their proper course. At first they made fair progress, but as they went on, their passage became slower and more dangerous. The marshes were bewildering and treacherous, and there was no permanent trail even for rangers to find through their shifting quagmires. The flies began to torment them, clouds of tiny midges that crept up their sleeves and breeches and into their hair. "I'm being eaten alive," cried Pippin. "Midge water? There are more midges than water." "What do they live on when they can't get hobbit?" asked Sam, scratching his neck. They spent a miserable day in this lonely and unpleasant country. Their camping place was damp, cold and uncomfortable, and the biting insects would not let them sleep. There were also abominable creatures haunting the reeds and tussocks that, from the sound of them, were evil relatives of the cricket. There were thousands of them, and they squeaked all around, "Nick breek, breek nick," unceasingly all the night until the hobbits were nearly frantic. They had not gone far on the 5th day when they left the last straggling pools and reed beds of the marshes behind them. The land before them began steadily to rise again. Away in the distance, eastward, they could now see a line of hills. The highest of them was at the right of the line and a little separated from the others. It had a conical top, slightly flattened at the summit. "That is Weathertop," said Strider. "The old road, which we have left far away on our right, runs to the south of it and passes not far from its foot." "I think," said Strider slowly, as if he was not quite sure, "I think the best thing is to go as straight eastward from here as we can, to make for the line of hills, not for Weathertop. There we can strike a path, I know, that runs at their feet. It will bring us to Weathertop from the north and less openly. Then we shall see what we shall see." At the day's end, they came to a stream that wandered down from the hills to lose itself in the stagnant marshland, and they went up along its banks while the light lasted. It was already night when at last they halted and made their camp under some stunted alder trees by the shores of the stream. Ahead there loomed now against the dusky sky the bleak and treeless backs of the hills. "There is no barrow on Weathertop, nor on any of these hills," said Strider. "The men of the West did not live here, though in their latter days they defended the hills for a while against the evil that came out of Angmar. This path was made to serve the forts along the walls, but long before, in the first days of the North Kingdom, they built a great watchtower on Weathertop. Armen Sul they called it. It was burnt and broken, and nothing remains of it now but a tumbled ring, like a rough crown on the old hill's head." On the western flank of Weathertop they found a sheltered hollow, at the bottom of which there was a bowl-shaped dell with grassy sides. There they left Sam and Pippin with the pony and their packs and luggage. The other three went on. After half an hour's plodding climb, Strider reached the crown of the hill. Frodo and Merry followed, tired and breathless. The last slope had been steep and rocky. On the top they found, as Strider had said, a wide ring of ancient stonework, now crumbling or covered with age-long grass, but in the centre a cairn of broken stones had been piled. They were blackened as if with fire. About them the turf was burnt to the roots, and all within the ring the grass was scorched and shriveled, as if flames had swept the hilltop, but there was no sign of any living thing.
I came too late to Bree, and too early to Weathertop, where beyond my aid the Witch King and his minions attacked Frodo, wounding him with a Morgul blade. Thankfully, Aragorn was there to save him.
They started off in a southerly direction. This would mean crossing the road, but it was the quickest way to more wooded country, and they needed fuel, for Strider said that Frodo must be kept warm, especially at night, while fire would be some protection for them all. It was also his plan to shorten their journey by cutting across another great loop of the road. East beyond Weathertop it changed its course and took a wide bend northwards. They made their way slowly and cautiously around the southwestern slopes of the hill and came in a little while to the edge of the road. There was no sign of the riders, but even as they were hurrying across, they heard far away two cries, a cold voice calling and a cold voice answering. Trembling, they sprang forward and made for the thickets that lay ahead. The land before them sloped away southwards, but it was wild and pathless. Bushes and stunted trees grew in dense patches with wide barren spaces in between. The grass was scanty, coarse and grey, and the leaves in the thickets were faded and falling. It was a cheerless land, and their journey was slow and gloomy. At the end of the 5th day, the ground began once more to rise slowly out of the wide, shallow valley into which they had descended. Strider now turned their course again northeastwards, and on the 6th day they reached the top of a long, slow-climbing slope and saw far ahead a huddle of wooded hills. Away below them they could see the road sweeping round the feet of the hills, and to their right a grey river gleamed pale in the thin sunshine. "I'm afraid we must go back to the road here for a while," said Strider. "We have now come to the river Horwell that the elves call Mythithel. It flows down out of the Etten Moors, the Trollfells north of Rivendell, and joins the Loudwater away in the south. Some call it the Grey Flood after that. It is a great water before it finds the sea. There is no way over it below its sources in the Etten Moors except by the last bridge on which the road crosses." They crossed the bridge in safety, hearing no sound but the water swirling against its 3 great arches. A mile further on they came to a narrow ravine that led away northwards through the steep lands on the left of the road. Here Strider turned aside, and soon they were lost in a sombre country of dark trees winding among the feet of sullen hills. "There are trolls," Pippin panted, "down in a clearing in the woods not far below. We got a sight of them through the tree trunks. They're very large." "We will come and look at them," said Strider, picking up a stick. Frodo said nothing, but Sam looked scared. The sun was now high, and it shone down through the half-stripped branches of the trees and lit the clearing with bright patches of light. They halted suddenly on the edge and peered through the tree trunks, holding their breath. There stood the trolls. 3 large trolls. One was stooping and the other 2 stood staring at him. Strider walked forward unconcernedly. "Get up, old stone," he said, and broke his stick upon the stooping troll. Nothing happened. There was a gasp of astonishment from the hobbits, and even then Frodo laughed. "Well," he said, "we are forgetting our family history. These must be the very 3 that were caught by Gandalf, quarrelling over the right way to cook 13 dwarves and 1 hobbit." "You shall ride my horse," said Glorfindel. "I will shorten the stirrups up to the saddle skirts, and you must sit as tight as you can. But you need not fear. My horse will not let any rider fall that I command him to bear. His pace is light and smooth, and if danger presses too near, he will bear you away, and with a speed that even the black steeds of the enemy cannot rival." "No, he will not," said Frodo. "I shall not ride him if I am to be carried off to Rivendell or anywhere else, leaving my friends behind in danger." Glorfindel smiled. "I doubt very much," he said, "if your friends would be in danger if you were not with them. The pursuit would follow you and leave us in peace. It is you, Frodo, and that which you bear that brings us all peril." Ride on," cried Glorfindel, and then loud and clear he called to the horse in the elf tongue, Nor a limb Asfaloth." At once the white house sprang away and sped like the wind along the last lap of the road. At the same moment the black horses leapt down the hill in pursuit, and from the riders came a terrible cry.